Welcome to Last Chance to See, Alex Bronzini-Vender. Thanks for being here.
Of course.
If you don't know, he's a student at Harvard. He's also a writer. He wrote this great piece in the New York Times recently titled "At Harvard and Elsewhere, the New Campus Orthodoxy is Even More Stifling." He also writes in the Harvard Crimson, right?
Yep.
Also, before we jump into your article and some of this stuff, I wanted to ask just a bit of the timeline stuff. How old are you? Like, what year are you at Harvard?
Sure. I'm a sophomore.
Sophomore. So were
second year.
Okay. So were you there post October 7th when?
Oh no. So I started college the semester following the encampments.
Okay. All right. Good to know. But
Yep.
Still, so you weren't there during the peak of like, Bill Ackman calling for people to never get jobs again and all of this.
No, but he's still doing that shit. So,
Right. I'm asking because, part of Alex's piece in the New York Times deals with this this kind of new anti-woke DEI sensitivity training thing that has been ushered in this new Trump era, and a lot of that is being using anti-Semitism as a reason to go after these things. So maybe you can explain. Maybe you can kind of explain what's going on in college campuses for us.
Yeah. Well, what's going on is, I mean, to the concern about was I here at the time of the encampments? Obviously not. But I am here as, Harvard begins rolling out what is essentially a mandatory DEI training on the matter of anti-Semitism, after having dismantled, the trainings on the basis of racial bias and so forth. We are now being required, as a condition of being able to register for courses, to complete a training on anti-Semitism.
And so you're saying previously those were, in the like woke era or whatever you want to call it, those were more geared towards anti-racial sensitivity?
So what I argue in this piece is that, and sort of the sensibility I see emerging everywhere in U.S. higher education, is that there's this real sort of anti-Semitism exception that's that the American right is entrenching to their crusade against DEI. In a lot of these red state anti-DEI bills, you have in pretty explicit terms what is a de facto exemption for DEI training and mandatory sensitivity training that has to do with anti-Jewish bias. And then I think also that you have these restrictions upon academic inquiry and academic speech that are being applied to people who are pro-Palestinian or who question the Trump administration's agenda on Palestine. So, this guy isn't even particularly pro-Palestinian. In January, Harvard canceled a lecture by this guy, Barry Levy, I think is how you pronounce his name, who's just a scholar who works on the public health effects of war. This is a guy who also does the same for Ukraine and the public health effects of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. He was set to give a talk at Harvard that was going to be about just the public health effects of the war in Gaza, and he was he called it a war. He did not call it a genocide. Again, this is not particularly controversial speech. This is fairly apolitical academic inquiry into what's going on with the spread of disease in Gaza, and Harvard kicked him off campus under the pretext that believe their pretext was that his speech, that his panel would not be constructive and that it would be one-sided, which is, I think, very similar to the rationales that were used to kick conservative activists off campus through the 2010s. And then one other another incident that happened quite recently is that Harvard removed Mary Bassett, who is the pro-Palestinian director of Harvard School of Public Health, I think was her position, removed her from her deanship. Now during peak woke, one of the offenses that people will repeatedly cite as like the worst thing that Harvard did, in this period was when one of the deans of one of the residential houses, it's a whole system. You live in a house for if you've seen the Social Network, you'll know this system. But you live in a house for 3 years.
They're like frats, but they're not frats.
Yeah, but everyone's assigned to one, and you live in after when you're a sophomore. Well, in your spring semester as a freshman, and then you live in them for your three upperclassmen years. Anyway, and they all have a dean that like leads the house, and one of the guys who's the dean of one of the houses got removed because he defended Harvey Weinstein in court, because people were like, "Oh my God, this is outrageous," and that's considered one of the sort of worst things that Harvard did under peak woke. But this is a person who was removed from a far more important position of academic leadership for what was transparently academic speech.
Well, no, it also seems like there's a real difference you're talking about here when, at least, it's hard to keep track of. Woke means a lot of different things to people too, which I think is kind of problematic. I think depending on who you talk to, it's either, depending on who you talk to, it could be a good thing. It could be, they could be referring to someone who has read the history and is using that to bring a historical context into the way they interact with the world. I think on the other end of the spectrum, there's people who think, you're destroying people's careers if you're not just outright saying that white men are evil and we need to eradicate them or whatever. There's all kinds of different styles of woke, I guess. And there's also different measures taken here too. I think when we're talking about that peak woke era of the 2010s, a lot of it dealt with, unless I'm wrong here, a lot of it dealt with social pressure. Protests coming from students. And I want to be fair. I think that had real consequences for people. There were people who got fired or removed from positions. I think there were I believe there were a couple of suicides of people who felt like they were iced out of academic positions because of their beliefs. So there were very real consequences, but the difference between, social pressure and actual policy pressure from the presidential administration, Obama was not going to war with the institutions in this way.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the right before Harvard, right before Trump announced his sort of initial rounds of demands against Harvard and suspended the research funding last May, there was a lawyer in the HHS, like a top lawyer, who put together these lists of like good things Harvard had done. That in as they were preparing their case against Harvard, and a few of the supposed good things that Harvard had done were, end certain speaker series, remove certain leaders of the department for the Center for Middle Eastern Studies. So nowhere during peak woke did the Obama administration go to colleges and say, yeah, these specific speakers are not, talking about structural racism in the way that we want you to. So you're going to have to kick them off campus. You're going to have to make them, you're going to have to shut down this speaker series, which is pretty much exactly what the Trump administration has indirectly sought of Harvard. There were cases of, there was this biologist at Harvard who made some remarks about biological sex that some DEI administrator found unsavory. Yeah, Carol Hooven. And then this DEI administrator, speaking, it should be said in a personal capacity, said this is unacceptable. She needs to apologize, blah, 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 blah. And then eventually she was sort of bullied out of the school. And then after that happened, Harvard took pretty immediate steps to redress the problem. They launched this initiative. It's called the Intellectual Vitality Initiative, where they have these, speaker series, and they really did see that as a cultural issue at the college and in the university. And immediately after that, also the I believe it's called the Council on Academic Freedom convened, and that's another initiative that's about remedying these kinds of excesses.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like looking back at those things, I think there was a real period of some regrettable things that happened. I think.
Well, sorry, my point here is specifically that when those things happened, there were avenues for redress, which there just are not now. You can't do that because Trump is going to kill you.
Right. Well, I mean, yes, I think it's important to point out these differences, right? I think you're talking about students, and you may find it very silly, and you may find it very regrettable the way people behaved during the 2010s. And there were some consequences there, but students protesting versus, obviously Mahmoud Khalil and Rumaiza Ozturk come to mind, where you're talking about people being faced with deportation over Rumaiza Ozturk was, if you go back and read the op-ed she was a part of, it's unbelievable that this is the kind of thing that could get you removed from the country. And so that is a very different thing that obviously has like an extreme chilling effect on college campuses.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing they're doing is they're screening people's social media if you're an international student. Like obviously the efforts to snatch up student protesters are kind of quieting down, though they are gonna try to redeport Mahmoud Khalil. But they are, if you are an international student, in order to get your visa screened, they go through your social media. And a natural question after that is like, are they gonna go through my online presence, right? I mean, like, I am an editor at the Harvard Crimson of the opinion section. And you can tell just, I think, by reading the paper, who are the voices who are, speaking up for Palestine. They are understandably, at least in, this semester and towards the end of last semester, not international students. And that's a chilling pressure that I think is far, far more profound than anything that any conservative students experienced.
Yeah. I want to ask you about the kind of on-campus anti-Semitism thing. It's difficult for me. Look, I'm 36. I haven't been on a college campus in a very long time. I don't talk
to... It'd be weird if you had.
I don't talk to a lot of people your age. So it's really nice to be able to talk to you because for me, I kind of see it from very far away. I see a lot of stuff on social media. It also, with algorithms, I'm sure it confirms a lot of the things I already believe. And, I think anyone who's watching this right now knows that I tend to be more to the left on these issues and have been supportive of Palestine. So, for me, I think when the college encampments broke out, I think I tweeted something along the lines of like, I think these kids are heroes, and I'm glad they're doing this. I think as someone just through the watching the latter half of the Biden presidency, just kind of arm and support this genocide it's horrific. And so watching anyone do something, pushing their institutions to divest and asking for more from the administration, it was great. But I obviously I couldn't speak to the anti-Semitism on the campus. Obviously, what was shown to me was that how this has always played out, that, anything pro-Palestinian was taken as a anti-Semitic incident. You know what I mean? So protesting the Israeli government was a anti-Semitic incident. All of a sudden, a chant of "From the River to the Sea" was an anti-Semitic incident, and that at least in my definition, they're trying to change the definition of anti-Semitism, does not rise to that. And also seeing, counter protests, especially UCLA getting extremely violent and dangerous for
Oh yeah, I
those
mean, what they did
students.
to the UCLA kids is by far worse than anything that happened to any Jewish student, at
Yeah.
least on an elite college campus. I mean, like launching fireworks at them.
Sure, yeah. Seeing very violent, and then when professors started to step up and stand up for these students protesting, seeing them, you're talking like, I saw like 60-year-old women just being thrown to the ground by police. So obviously, what was shown to me was that. I am curious if there is a real, if on college campuses you're feeling a very real presence of a rise in anti-Semitism and a safety issue for Jewish college students.
Something I've been thinking about a lot lately is that I do think that we need some kind of distinction between behavior that's clearly meant to menace and to intimidate people, that is not good behavior, that like should not take place on a college campus or anywhere, but that is also not anti-Semitic, and I don't think that's a distinction that got made. I think there were certainly incidents of anti-Jewish, like anti-Jewish bias and so forth. Do I think that those represented like a systemic culture of that sort of thing inside the movement? No. I mean, like they held like a, Shabbat inside the Columbia encampment, right?
Sure, and it's important to point out that that a lot of these were led by a lot of these protests were led by American Jews.
Yeah, I mean there was I think that Harvard collected statistics as part of their report on anti-Jewish bias at Harvard, on what percent of Jews participated in these in the pro-Palestinian protests, and it was very high. It was something to the order of 20%.
Yeah.
To your question about like the safety thing, I think that so you can actually look at the crime statistics. Every college in America is required to report under the Clery Act incidents of all crimes that get reported to the campus police, irrespective of whether charges get pressed, and irrespective of the finding that the police make. So already that's a bit of an inflated statistic. And you can see that Harvard is a remarkably safe campus to be of any religious minority. Hate crimes did go up in 2024. But even what gets classified as a hate crime is a little tenuous. I mean, in one case, there was a freshman who had a mezuzah fall off her door. And the police went and she reported it as a hate crime against her, saying that it had been ripped from her door. The police went and investigated, and they found it 3 doors down, undamaged. It's certainly possible that it was ripped from her door. Equally possible that it just fell off. There were no cases of violent anti-religious hate crimes on Harvard's campus. Another incident that got classified as a hate crime was someone put a sticker that said "Stop funding Israeli genocide" up on a pole outside Hillel, and it had the Star of David replaced with a swastika. Again, like, I don't think that's not something I would say. That's not something I think anyone should say. I think it's edgy. I think it's counterproductive. I think it's easily interpretable as like a Nazi statement. But I think it also is protected political speech, right? Like, it could very well just be a statement that like Israel's actions are equivalent to Nazi Germany's, which again, as like edgy and and shitty I find that analogy to be, especially expressed in that way, I just am not convinced that that's like, that's not protected political speech.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to their, I think for the new anti-Semitism definition for the what is it, the IHRA that they're trying
IHRA,
to,
yep.
that they're trying.
Well,
to
that
push
would be considered anti-Semitic.
Yes. Can you maybe describe some of the things that were in your in your little, I don't know what you would call it, sensitivity training or
bias training,
bias training. And I guess my other question too was, did they keep in some of the racial things, or was it solely based on?
Did they keep in some of the racial things?
Some of the racial bias? No,
they did not. But so it was ostensibly a sort of even-handed Islamophobia and anti-Semitism training. That said, Harvard has adopted an official definition of anti-Semitism, which classifies, for instance, denying the state of Israel's right to exist as anti-Semitic conduct. There is no equivalent definition of anti-Arab bias, which includes denying the state of Palestine's right to exist. So there's clearly a group that clearly the effect of the intended effect of the of that training, let's say, is not to chill pro-Palestinians. Sorry, is not to chill pro-Israel speech. So this training itself says we've adopted the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. We encourage you to review the examples. You click on the examples, and the examples of anti-Semitic conduct per the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which I believe Harvard put on their website, as if you wanna, you can look at them if you're worried about violating the rules, are denying the state of Israel's right to exist, likening the state of Israel to Nazi Germany, holding the state of Israel to double standards. Again, heavily unclear what a double standard is, or what a acceptable single standard would be. Again, just protected political speech that is just declared anti-Semitic.
And there are you had some other instances of other schools outside of Harvard. I think Northwestern had an even stronger bias training that they were going through, where some people maybe weren't even allowed to take their classes.
Oh yeah, there were students, I believe Jewish students, who refused to take the training just because of how preposterous it was, and were not allowed to take their classes. I don't know how that ended.
Do you know what was included in that training?
Yeah, I mean, so there was a map of Israel, a map of Israel-Palestine, which included the entire West Bank and Gaza as Israeli territory. There was an exercise that students were required to do, where they distinguish pro-Palestinian activist statements from those of KKK Grand Wizard David Duke. Some of David Duke's statements were like, "I condemn Jewish group behavior," and then the one of the pro-Palestinian activist statement is like, "I condemn the conflation of Judaism with Zionism." Then there were other legitimately anti-Semitic statements by pro-Palestinian organizers and activists that were included among the sort of selection that you were meant to distinguish between. There was one that was like, "The more I read about Hitler, the more I love him." But if you look into it, that statement was actually made by someone who was like, I believe, 14 or 15 at the time, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm not sure if that person is representative of the movement at large. Clearly cherry-picked statements meant to push a political agenda that you have to sign on to if you want to take your classes at Northwestern. You have to basically endorse the idea that Israel is entitled to, the entire West Bank and Gaza if you want to take your classes at Northwestern.
So it does sound like there actually is a discernible rise, maybe just in hate crimes across the board, post October 7th. And their way to deal with it is basically just making sure that there is no way to properly criticize Israel or deal with the realities on the ground of what's happening in Gaza and the West Bank. Is that a fair characterization?
think that's absolutely the case. And by the way, the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism is not just this, like, there are a lot of people who say, okay, well, they've adopted this thing under pressure from the Trump administration. Are they actually enforcing it? Are they actually doing anything with it? Absolutely they are. Larry Summers, the now disgraced close associate of Jeffrey Epstein, before he, evaporated, I guess. Before all that, he would routinely go around and try to harangue Harvard administrators, occasionally successfully, into removing and silencing pro-Palestinian academics on the basis that their political speech violated the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. The reason that they've removed the director of the Center for Middle Eastern Studies is because Larry Summers went and was like, this guy's violating the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. He would routinely do this with student protesters. He would routinely do this with, I believe he did it in the case of Mary Bassett, though I may be wrong. So absolutely, this is a precedent that people are trying to use and successfully invoking to silence academics with whom they disagree.
You mentioned a little bit, so your own role at the Harvard Crimson, and seeing who is willing to put out certain things. I was wondering if you had any other instances of the chilling effect of these actions taken by the Trump administration and Harvard.
I mean, I think that as I spoke to Ryan Enos, who's this sort of one of the faculty members at Harvard, who's been most vocal in defending free speech here over the past, I would say, over the past 6 years, including sort of the tail end of the sort of peak woke moment. Again, woke is kind of a silly term; it's very vague, but roughly this social justice moment that I would say concluded in 2023. And I mean, he says that his students are noticeably more, just from the perspective of a faculty member, that his students are noticeably more reluctant to express opinions that, I mean, he teaches a class that's about political psychology, sort of an intro political science class. One of the things he covers is intergroup conflict, like in South Africa, in the Jim Crow South, et cetera, and in Israel and Palestine. And one of the things that he's noticed is that just his students are much more reluctant to engage forthrightly with the material. And I think that many faculty whom I've spoken to have noticed the exact same thing.
Are there other subjects that are noticeable that people are apprehensive about outside of the Israel-Palestine issue with this new Trump era?
Stephen Levitsky, forgetting his middle initial, he wrote the book How Democracies Die, told me that he also has trouble convening conversations on authoritarianism and on these sorts of issues, because again, students are worried, and maybe not rationally, but when you take the extraordinary actions that Trump took against, people like Rumeysa Ozturk and Mahmoud Khalil, people wonder. The other thing that I think is worth noting is that in the Northwestern settlement, Trump essentially banned a lot of forms of academic inquiry related to pediatric gender medicine. He essentially deemed that at Northwestern an off-limit subject. They and I forget the exact terms of the deal. Now, of course, like there are not a lot of undergrads who are super into like pediatric gender medicine. Like my thoughts on it personally are mixed, and I don't think there's super strong evidence one way or the other in terms of like what age people be allowed to transition at. But it is insane that the government can just go to a college and go to a university and say, yeah, this is not a subject we think we think you should be allowing researchers to reach certain conclusions on.
Well, who knows? Maybe RFK has all the answers for us, and maybe we should really be taking a cue from his
be drinking our raw milk.
Yeah. I mean, as we're talking about these these off-limit subjects, it's hard to not think about the University of Austin scandal a little bit. I know you were paying attention to this. It's almost as if they, I don't know. It's almost as if they read your article and were like, we can do it even better. If people don't know, University of Austin was, it was, as I was reading the Politico article, I was I was shocked at how many kind of institutional and, very legitimate people they were able to attract, because my experience with it was like they announced it, everyone was mocking it. They had Bari Weiss's backing, and I think Peter Thiel is a big backer, and it's as silly as you think. I think Peter Thiel literally gives talks.
Yeah, he gives lectures
on the Antichrist and stuff. It's so. And, obviously they have backing from Peter Lonsdale, and their whole thing was
Joe Lonsdale,
sorry. One of the founders of Palantir. And their whole thing was we're making the anti-woke university, you know what I mean? There's we're not doing any of this. It's a free speech. You could say whatever you want. There's no more of this cancel culture. This is campuses have been taken over by communists like Alex Bronzini-Vender, and they're not safe for us. So,
my bad.
But yeah, but some reporting has come out that maybe they did not usher in this era of
shocked
of some free speech haven. Could you explain a little bit about what actually went down there?
Well, what happened there? God, where do you even begin? I mean, I'd just be recapitulating the Politico guys reporting. It turns out that, at the beginning it did seem like you had a lot of people who were legitimately interested in the sort of free speech, no cancel culture vision of this university. But then you had this one incident. They were also very against Title IX, I believe it was, and they were like, we need to have fair sexual misconduct policies that allow you allow sort of more fairer procedures where people are allowed to defend themselves and clear their name, so that what happens to Brett Kavanaugh doesn't happen here.
Which I believe they were very quickly rocked by some kind of
and then it turned out
scandal.
that some kid basically made some remarks that a student had reported as saying that a girl was inviting or was sort of going to be raped for wearing an outfit that she was wearing. And then literally like first day of school, the kid is just kicked off campus, gone. Which is worth saying is like, that is more draconian than any Ivy would do if a kid were accused of, sexual misconduct. I don't know of a single case where someone has been accused of any sort of sexual misconduct that has resulted in their like immediate physical removal and expulsion from campus. Like over the course of, on the very first day of school. And then from there, that sort of seems to have provided the circumstances for this consolidation of power by, a sort of clique of administrators who believe in the ideas of Leo Strauss.
Joe Lonsdale was a big pusher of all this, and I guess that was the impetus for a lot of it. He called some kind of meeting where he basically laid out,
and then they also sort of came to support Trump's attack on Harvard, which alienated. I believe it alienated Nadine Strossen, formerly of the ACLU, Jonathan Haidt, Steven Pinker of Harvard. And then in their messaging, they just became this very trollish, outwardly right-wing partisan institution.
Yeah, just real quick. These are, so this was someone who was in the meeting. I believe it was Neil Ferguson, or they were talking about how chair of the board, Joe Lonsdale, came out and talked about that all staff and faculty of UATX must subscribe to the 4 principles of anti-communism, anti-socialism, identity politics, and anti-Islamism.
There goes my future job at UTX.
It's I don't know. It's very apparent that they. I think everyone always knew this going into it, but it's very strange to see it all laid out so bare that they aren't actually free speech. They aren't actually protecting these institutions. They
the funny thing about the funny thing about the UATX case in particular is that it's not like anyone woke wanted to go near UATX to begin with. Like, they didn't really have to do all that. They just kind of wanted to. I don't think that there was any real risk that that UATX is gonna go woke.
Yeah, I mean the people they're trying to root out. I think they had some maybe a couple left.
Yeah, they're trying to root out who Michael Lind,
right?
Who wrote a book on how the Vietnam War was really cool. But I mean, a few things about UATX that I think are relevant. First, one of they have this kind of very trollish messaging. They're very, very unprofessional. I mean, one of the things that they're not a serious institution, not only for these kinds of ideological things, but also for the reason that earlier this semester, they posted on Twitter an image of a mailbox of letters that their students had received, that included several students' full names and addresses. And I wrote them this angry email about hey, this is you guys really shouldn't be posting your students' names and addresses on Twitter. And they fortunately deleted the post. But it's not a serious project.
Yeah, an important note. I believe still at this time it is an unaccredited institution.
Let me think about how to put this. I mean, another thing about UATX is that they're clearly just a sort of hype moments and aura institution. They all wore graduation robes on the first day of class, and I'm why are you doing that, right?
Well, because you already graduated once you made it to UATX. You graduated to the next step.
Yeah, it's very clearly just exists as an institution, first and foremost to produce content. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it goes without saying that it kind of demonstrates the bankruptness, I think, of a very large camp within of people who considered themselves anti-woke, who did not dispute. I mean, this is such an obvious observation.
Which is also another thing I wanted to ask you about. As you're talking about that camp, my worry as someone who is really not near young people and interacting with young people, just from seeing kind of this push of, I mean, Nick Fuentes has been around for so long, but he's gained so much popularity. The clavicular thing, I had no idea who this guy was until 2 or 3 weeks ago, but he's everywhere now, and Sneeko, and they're all singing Hail Hitler, and I'm how old are you?
I'm 19.
19? I mean, are 19-year-olds into this shit? Is this something?
Look, I mean, I think that the real concerning thing is not that who's the average Sneeko fan? You see him on his streams, and he goes to he sees a group of 8-year-olds or 9-year-olds, and they're all oh my God, Sneeko. It's I think that honestly, for someone like him, and I don't know about clavicular, given that this is a guy who I found out about him when he ran over a guy in his Cybertruck.
Oh, I didn't even know he did that.
Which happened 2 weeks ago. That's when I found out about him, so I don't know much about the demographics of clavicular. To me seems like just a sort of classic lolcow.
I don't even
this
know
guy
what that is.
Oh, lolcow is someone who oh God, I'm sorry to have used such a lolcow is someone whom you who almost gets cyber stalked because every facet of their existence is to a certain segment of the population just so amusing. Like there are websites like Kiwi Farms, which are pretty shitty, but that, people just kind of stalk random, like streamers and so forth who are like so obviously a mess,
And it's
that they
not
find it amusing.
genuine. It's not genuine
No, it's
fandom.
not.
It's
It's not fandom. It's
it's
like
a whole
you're
other
so
thing.
insane that you're like doing meth so you can have hollow cheeks at 20 years old. Like I can't peel my eyes off you. I think that's what much of Clavicular's, like I think the much of Clavicular's fan base is because he's like, they view him as just such a disaster of a person. But I do think that the Sneeko stuff, I think even maybe more than Fuentes, honestly, not because of like the content of what either of them believe is different. I think that they both believe the same equally dangerous things. But there's something about Sneeko in that sorry, maybe this is completely like off base, but there's something about Sneeko in the way that he has such a young fan base compared to Nick Fuentes that's like, I don't know, I think these are like older guys, people who are not, people who in all likelihood are like, how do I put this? Not the smartest, not the most likely to hold power.
You don't have to be. You don't have to be polite to the groypers. You can.
whereas like Sneeko, it's like these are kids. Like who knows where they're going to be, and they're just growing up in this like ideological sludge of this like Nazi shit. And I don't know. I find that concerning on a way that the way that he's able to get through specifically to kids is like terrifying to me.
Yeah, I mean we're like all a few years into this experiment we've been forced to endure, where we used to interact with social media sites that were somewhat moderated, and there was probably a little bit of pressure from administrations and stuff. I mean, I know that for a fact. I've talked to people at YouTube who are like, yes, no matter what administration is in power, their number one goal is we don't want to be regulated. So like we're trying to make you happy. But we are now in this new era where we're pretty much every time I tweet, it's like I get called some kind of slur, and that was not the case. And yeah, I don't know. It's really opening up this debate, this free speech debate for me, and I think I'm very pro moderation. I don't want to see Nazi shit proliferating. I don't want to see people heiling Hitler. I don't want you just have to go to the far corners of the internet if you want to find that shit.
Yeah, like I don't think that the government should be, like making hate speech illegal. I mean, we see the consequences of that in a country like Germany, where it's, effectively illegal to, to express many kinds of solidarity with Palestine. But I also think that, with these big platforms, especially when it comes to, I guess one thing I think about in relation to free speech and hate speech is that like the kinds of things that, like a lot of I suspect that a lot of, maybe not a lot, but a good amount of Fuentes fans are like him because he's funny and he's entertaining and he's provocative and there's always something new with him. And they exist at like kind of an ironic remove from the ideas that he propagates, and they're okay kind of, calling me a Jew or calling you whatever they call you. But like, would they really be willing to attach that to their real name in real life? Would they be willing to organize like a Nazi rally at their university? I'm not sure. And so yeah, I don't know. Or organize just a physical Nazi rally in real life, right? Like, I don't think that the Groypers tend to have a huge real life footprint.
Right. I've never encountered one. I'm curious how you're, like you seem like a pretty normal 19-year-old kid. I'm curious, what your feelings How do you think like people your age feel about both the what I think you referred to it as the peak woke era, which is a good term, and like this woke backlash that has led to this new anti-woke era that is is almost more dangerous in our opinion. But how do you feel like people feel generally about obviously there's a lot of jokes. I'm sure you see the jokes of like bring woke back. Do you think that's how young people feel, or do you think they like actually, do you think they mostly recognize like, okay, maybe there were some excesses of this, or they genuinely want to snap back to?
I think it's absolutely the case that like your average, again, I like, the things I write about, and for the most part are very centered upon elite universities, because those are the ones I know. And so I can't speak for campuses beyond that one, but at least I think at Harvard and at many schools like Harvard, people are realizing that that the sort of free speech absolutists of the 2010s got more right than they got wrong. So for instance, like, I think that people really do believe that free speech is a normative principle and is a sort of rallying cry that we should all get behind. And you see activists very frequently invoke it when they talk about, how they're being repressed. They're not going and saying, well, our ideas are the righteous ones and the correct ones, and therefore they should not be suppressed. They say, everyone has a right to make their views heard. And I mean, if you look at my friend Milan Singh runs the Yale Youth Poll, where they poll people who are below, I believe, the age of 32, with a particular focus on Gen Z. And they have the best data on what Gen Z political attitudes are. What he found is that free speech is like the third most important issue for Gen Z, and it comes in somewhere at something like 60, the mid 60s. So even if we assume that like, something like 45% of Gen Z is conservative, that's still a pretty sizable amount of, of Gen Z that does not have conservative sensibilities, that believes very strongly in the matter of free speech, and I expect that to increase.
My big worry with, because I've been thinking about it a lot of like, so 2016 was 10 years ago. There was a lot of postmortems after Trump won. I guess you were probably quite young, but
right, I was
woke. I guess you would be 9.
I was 9. Yeah.
Woke was one of the culprits. It's funny. I'm sure you've seen people doing the trend of posting pictures of themselves in 2016 and on Instagram or whatever. Or maybe that's only something cringe millennials are doing. And
I've seen them.
Okay. I was like, Jesus, did I just out myself?
I have one image of myself on my phone from 2016, and I'm chiseling a block of wood. I'm not sure why, so I haven't posted that one.
I have a lot because I was 26 and we were taking pictures of ourselves. But it was funny. I had a screenshot of there was this joke that got Colin Jost in some hot water where he said it was something like Tinder updated their app and it now allows for 37 different genders, and the punchline was the feature is called "Why Hillary Clinton Lost the Election," and everyone was like, and then obviously there was think pieces and Colin Jost let us down and he sold out, and so I've just been thinking about kind of woke so much, and there have been things that have showed up recently where I'm like, as people are saying, oh, we want woke back and all this stuff. I don't know if you saw this article in the New York Times. It was called "None of Mamdani's deputy mayors are black," and it's become a problem. And this really reminds me of what was one of my least favorite parts of woke was the weaponization of identity against the left. And I don't know if Hillary Clinton lost because of Colin Jost joke, but I do think there was a real effort on her part to kind of try to harm Bernie's campaign by labeling him a class reductionist and not taking into account these things. And seeing this article about Zohran Mamdani's deputy mayors, I was shocked. I was like, oh my God, it's happening again. They're going to tank this, our one hope in a sea of despair. You're talking about a guy, I think, it's been 3 weeks and this guy's been able to, he's out there fixing roads, banning junk fees on hotels, going after gig apps for stealing people's tips, doing all this stuff. And so, yeah, it's just very, and I'm sure a lot of people only saw the headline, and the headline is annoying enough, but if you read through the article, it's very apparent that this man is trying to make sure he has a diverse administration. And they quote basically one woman who is a political consultant, and she's a little bit annoyed that he has not named a black deputy mayor, but they have many quotes from the Mamdani administration and point out that he has hired many black and Latino people to high positions. So that is my real fear of this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when it's fun to post about woke too, but I think that something that we should remember is that, like, woke one did come about in part as a way to outflank Bernie Sanders in the primary. Obviously, Hillary Clinton has the classic quote of, like, will breaking up all the banks solve racism? But, some of the other thing that Democrats frequently point to is evidence of, why did Kamala Harris lose the border? Why did Hillary Clinton lose? She wasn't tough enough on the border as Trump was. In fact, the reason that Hillary Clinton had Hillary Clinton promised not to deport any undocumented immigrants who did not have criminal records. Part of the reason that she made that promise, at least in my view, is that Bernie Sanders had a more moderate record on the border than her. She was trying to outflank him on that issue. And that's why the Democratic Party took that left turn that then gets sort of labeled as the excesses of sort of far left radicalism.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure all of this is going to continue to play out as the left and the moderates continue to tear each other apart as Trump tears the country apart. I'm going to have to let you go in a little bit. I'm wondering if there's anything else you should. When I saw that clavicular video of him talking about how Gavin Newsom mogs JD Vance, I think I posted something like, "Oh man, I'm not going to be able to understand 2028. This is going to be very confusing." I'm wondering if you have any other things people should know about politically as Gen Z becomes more of a voting bloc that we're going to have to contend with and win their votes.
Well, I have a theory that Gen Z is the greediest generation in American history.
The greediest generation.
Yeah, the greediest, and that sort of greed is like and how much Zoomers value money is kind of a driving factor underlying our politics. I mean, there's there are longitudinal studies of how much do high school seniors say they value money? What do they name as their priorities in life? In the 70s, in the late 70s, early 80s, it was something like somewhere in the range of 10% of people said that money was the most important thing in their life. Today that figure's up to 37%. Zoomers also, there's a lot of discourse around are Zoomers conservative? I think the evidence is fairly clear that Zoomers are both more liberal and more conservative than previous generations. We're just more polarized, which is to say that there are fewer Zoomer independents. There was kind of a confusing stat that got run on CNN that Zoomers are actually the generation that has the most independent party registration of any. I think that stat's a little bullshit, because if you actually look at political behavior, people who identify as independent often act as staunch partisans. Ticket splitting is declining in the U.S. and political while turnout is increasing. So this idea that independents are relevant in any way is I don't find that very credible. But anyway, I think that but yes, so Zoomers are more conservative in many ways, but they also have very progressive attitudes on like gender. We believe in workplace equality at higher, especially the 18 to 22 cohort believes in workplace equality at basically a higher level than any other previous cohort. This is again per the Yale Youth Poll data that came out this fall. And look, like I can't deduce any sort of direct causality here, but what I suspect is going on is that Zoomers just want everyone to get rich, right? Like the reason that we support workplace equality, we're also extremely agnostic to matters of like who should earn the money in the relationship and who should do the childcare. More so than any other generation, we don't really feel clearly that breadwinning should be a man's role and that childcare should be a woman's role. We think that those are not gendered responsibilities, and we believe in workplace equality. But at the same time, the 18 to 22 cohort believes that traditional masculinity is under threat, that acceptance of gay and transgender people has gone too far.
See, this is where I get so confused, where it's like, I'm like, oh, great. So, in my mind, I'm like, he's describing, we're going to have these, I don't know, fiscal conservatives who are like, it doesn't matter who's the breadwinner or whatever, but then they're like, we're under attack.
But what that suggests to me is, I think, generation that's motivated by, I mean, I always find it a little insufferable when people try to be like, oh, I'm the Gen Z whisperer. Like, I don't fundamentally know much more than anyone who's taken the time to look through this data.
Yeah, I'm only asking you because you are one.
I mean, this is just a theory that I've been thinking about, which is just that, like, we really, and this is, I think, what explains the centrality of affordability, which is this kind of buzzword, to Gen Z politics and why it's among our highest priorities rather than climate change or rather than, democracy and so forth.
Yeah. From what I can see, I think it's, I think sometimes people like me and older people, I hate that I'm lumping myself in with older people right now, but I think that it's just, it's a different, I think there used to be an easier, like, filing people into Democrats and Republicans, and I think it's much more difficult with Gen Z. I think even, like, with people's views on Israel, all across the political spectrum, you have kind of, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I think there's people on the left, Gen Z people on the left who, from more of a humanitarian standpoint and, anti-genocide and pro-Palestinian rights. And then on the right, you have this kind of America First, Tucker Carlson line of who gives a shit about Israel? Why am I giving them any money? That kind of thing. And so people are kind of confused. They're like, wait, even the right doesn't support it anymore?
Yeah, and I think that another thing that's going on the right is that they're deciding, like the right as for the last 40 years has thrived upon choosing a minority to hate on until that gets stale and then finding another minority to hate on. And at this point, the only two minorities left to hate on are Arabs and Jews, right? Like they've hated on gay people, they've hated on trans people, they've hated on, they've hated on Arabs. So even like Bush era Islamophobic rhetoric, was like, it didn't come from the top. Like George W. Bush was not like, right? Like there's the whole anecdote about like the day after 9/11, he visited a mosque. Was he sincere? No. But like there was at least some effort from like the top neocons to not super antagonize, some Arabs.
Sure. I mean, there's tons of quotes and instances of Bush coming out and being like, look, these are good Americans. They don't deserve.
And now there's this question, I think, of coalition management of like, do we think we want to be the coalition that is, against, like what's the arithmetic here? Do we gain more from, being violently Islamophobic, or do we gain more from being violently anti-Semitic? this is, I think, what the like Laura Loomer versus Nick Fuentes divide comes down to, is like Fuentes is trying to make the case that like the right gains the most as a matter of arithmetic. I think that Tucker Carlson's trying to do it as well, is trying to make the case that like the right gains more as a matter of arithmetic from antagonizing Jews than it does from antagonizing Arabs and Muslims. Whereas Laura Loomer believes that anti-Arab hatred can be the sort of new frontier in which minority the American right hates on next.
Well, that's probably a good place to leave it. We're going to find out where the where Gen Z lies. I'm sure in 2026 we'll see if they we'll see how they vote. Thanks for coming on. Do you want to tell people where to find you?
Follow me on Twitter at Alex Bronzini. I write for the Harvard Crimson biweekly. So mostly on Harvard stuff that probably is not relevant to the vast majority of you, but I try to keep it relevant to the country. Yeah.
Also, a pretty good follow on Twitter. Very fun. He's not just talking about Harvard stuff. It's good. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for listening. And go follow Alex wherever if you want more of his work and read his writing.